It's Samara. Thanks for officially being on the podcast. I was just telling you, we've been catching up, and I'm like, we got to hit record. This is what happens
Yes.
when you have friends on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been a while since we caught up. It's been a while since I've done some regular podcasts. So I'm ready to get back in the game.
Let's do it. We are appreciative of you being here. I usually like, at least if I know the person I'm having on, I always tee up with a quick personal story. You probably don't know this, but I'll tell it to you very quickly. First time I ever met you, I think was either 2020 or 2021. I had just moved to Chicago. I didn't know many folks yet, like in the ecosystem. I was still trying to get my groove going. And do you remember we sort of shared a panel with Generator? Do you remember
Yes.
this? Yeah. So for folks, Generator is like a Midwest-based incubator accelerator. They were doing this, I guess, insurtech, corporate venture capital kind of a theme of a panel. I was moderating. Samara was one of the panelists, along with Victor Gutwein, who's also a good friend, also a guest
Hmm.
on the podcast. And I remember Vic sort of pulled me aside. He's like, "Hey, because by then we started knowing each other, and he was trying to help me get plugged into the community. And he's like, "Do you know Samara?" And I'm like, "Honestly, no, I don't. Like, I've heard a lot about her. I'm really excited to get to know her." He's like, "Dude, I'm going to tell you something." And this was I think when you probably just raised 6 million for Fund One for Chingona.
Hmm.
He's like, "She's already a badass, but I'm telling you from now, like, this is one person in Chicago to stay very close to, because
Oh,
like you're looking at a rocket ship." And I'm
oh
like,
my
"Damn."
gosh.
I'm like, "All right, let's go."
Oh my gosh. Thank you,
So
Victor. Oh,
he
he's
called it
so,
too. This was before Fun
oh,
too. He's like, "You got to stay close. Like, she's really something. She's already successful in something, but like what you're about to see is even
oh,
crazier." So, anyways, I did want
Victor.
to, yeah,
Oh,
don't want to
thank
miss
you for
that.
telling me that. No, Victor is incredible and what he's done for the ecosystem and for the Midwest.
Yeah.
And, thank you, Victor, for saying that. He's so kind. But yeah, look, the Midwest we have our own ecosystem. There's so much opportunity here. And I'm so grateful that, I met you early on in your journey here and all that you've done so far, right? And so, yeah, we need to work together to build this up because it could be really, really be something huge. And we're just
Hmm.
in the early stages. Even now with all the progress, I think there's so much opportunity, so yeah, so thank you for sharing that story.
I felt you'd appreciate it. And again, for folks who might not know Vic, founder of M25, we did have a podcast. So if you want to listen to that. But to your point, a rising tide lifts all ships. And that was kind of my first foray into the Midwest and seeing truly how people could be supportive, especially in the VC ecosystem. Before we dive in to all of that, I kind of wanted to go, folks will eventually learn and understand your story better throughout this episode. But I want to go grassroots with you first. I want to go back to Mexico, where you lived from 0 to 6 years before moving to the US. So you grew up with immigrant parents. I grew up with immigrant parents from the Middle East to Canada. So I know the immigrant story really well. I can resonate. But I want to hear it from you. What was the internal Chingona of Samara like when she was a younger child?
Yeah, as you know, with any immigrant parents, there's a lot that goes into your upbringing that is very different. And um, that on top of the low income, uh, household was rough because just with anybody, struggling to get ahead and to have parents that work minimum wage jobs, multiple jobs, it's not like you have access of anything, access of time with them, access of resources, food, even, right? And so you have to make do with very little. And there is no cushion, right? There is no, oh,
Pillow.
this can't work, right? It has to work. And so I learned so much from my parents, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do that. And I remember thinking most of my life, I'm here in spite of that. And now I say I'm here because of that, because of those experiences. And coming to the US and not only being in this kind of low income household and seeing my parents struggle and seeing all the challenges, But then on top of that, the cultural differences, on top of that, the language differences, that was a lot. And my parents were just trying to survive. And so me and my sister were left home by ourselves a lot. And what that allowed us to do is, kind of learn from each other. And so you might have heard this story, but the way I got ahead in math was my sister would come home. She's 3 years older than me. She always wanted to be a teacher. She actually teaches at Northwestern right now,
Oh, no way.
engineering design. Yeah, yeah. So this was
Nice.
something she wanted to do for a while. But she is 3 years older than me, and she would come home and teach me all the math that she learned that day. And so we had this little chalkboard that only half of it worked because we got it like for free from like garbage somewhere or something. And so she would write down problems and I would just do them. And that's how I got just better at math. And so that was, I guess there was some natural ability, but some that my sister would teach me. And so that's how I got ahead. My parents, just taught us the value of hard work and that we, had limited resources. So I got my parents buy me 3 outfits in the beginning of the year for school and 3 outfits for the summer. And that was it. Right. And so
Mm.
you just kind of, and not fancy outfits from, Payless and whatever else. So with that, there was always you're not part of the crew or you're not part of the
Of
same,
course.
of people getting whether it's how you look, your name, how you talk, how your family lives, to all the things. And so I just learned to be different and be comfortable with that difference. And so now being the same is kind of boring for me, right? And so if everyone's going one way, I typically tend to go the other way just because that's just how I was raised and I was comfortable around that.
Mm.
But I'm very grateful for my parents and the upbringing. And also one other thing is that, no matter how much little they had, they always gave. And so when we came here, we came to Rogers Park and my grandma was here and she lived in a 1 bedroom apartment and it was us, it was my aunt at one point, it was other cousins from Mexico that would come in and we would just like sleep on the floor like sardines, and that was it. And that was what we had. And we kind of all shared in the resources. And then my mom, when we finally were able to afford our own little apartment, a 2 bedroom apartment, 5 of us at the time would sleep in one room, 2 twin beds, and then we got the other room. We would have people come that recently came to the country. We would kind of help them get a job, get all the things, and then they would move on. And so even at the young age, you realize, okay, you even if you have nothing, very little, there's still something you can give, and that's the real power of a lot of these communities, as you probably experienced with the immigrant community. There's so few of us, and so you come together and you really help out each other. And so I saw the power of that, the beauty of that, and now I'm just super proud of being Latina. I mean, chingona even. I mean, that's like a super, my parents were super chingones, like chingones. I mean, the word, but my mom, I mean, my dad, just coming to a new country with 2 kids, no job, not knowing the language and having to assimilate and then having, their daughters be able to pursue kind of their passions, I think is just a beautiful thing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And for folks listening, Chingona, as I've come to read, is a badass woman, right, in
Yes,
Mexican Spanish. Yes.
right.
Uh, so I love that, and I resonate a lot. There was so much to unpack in what you just said. The two that stand out to me, which I also kind of went through myself, is having to be resourceful. So doing a lot with little. And I know you sort of, it's interesting hearing you talk about your personal upbringing. You're weaving a lot of what you had to go through into what you want to see in founders you
Hmm.
ideally would want to invest in. So it's kind of an interesting
Hmm.
thing. And the
Yeah,
second to me that stands out is the creativeness. Like if you can't fit the mold, don't kind of force it. Just create a mold that you fit in and you're comfortable with,
exactly.
you
Your
know,
authentic self. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And for a while it was like, why am I different? Why can't I get the latest whatever? Why can't,
the
and it's just like,
Nikes,
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I got the Nike version of Payless, but,
exactly.
and
The opposite swoosh.
right, exactly. Right. But it shoots,
It
and
works.
it works. And even that was a step up from my father, who was an orphan, in Mexico and barely had shoes or food, right? So it all kind of you're right. And this perspective that you build in your life, then, as an investor, you learn to see things differently. You learn to see opportunities differently. You can relate to different types of founders with different lived
Mm.
experiences. And that was really the premise of Chingona Ventures was there's this whole set of demographic shift in the United States. A lot of these demographic groups I come from, these groups that are changing the way, that they make money, the way they live, the way they work, the way they eat. There's just so many changes happening. And the VC world at the time was, still run by certain types of people with certain types of backgrounds. And so I just thought, well, there's this opportunity here to really see businesses that are investing, that are creating businesses around these demographic shifts, that are being built by people that don't fit your traditional mold, that are seeing these opportunities in geographies that aren't kind of the core geographies, but are getting significant early validation from these unique customer sets. And so that was the premise of launching Chingona Ventures.
Did it ever frustrate you because I was reading part of that upbringing that, your father was an accountant in Mexico, immigrates to the US, and like many immigrants, they can't necessarily have the same career profile they had back home in a new country. And I remember that was frustrating for me, even as a kid. I remember because, the stress sort of boggles down from your parents to kids. And I could
Yes,
feel my dad, like both my parents, like this anger, like I worked so hard
yes,
back home and I don't have the same level of respect here. Did that push you even more to,
all the
because you
time.
sort of bear this guilt, right? Or even responsibility that because they did this for us, I now have a responsibility to make up for that delta that they lost.
100%. Yeah. And, some might call it trauma, some, right? But whatever it is,
I share it with you, sister.
right? We got some of our own, trauma we had to
I
go
hear
through,
you.
but yes, I remember there's a specific situation where my mom, she was working at this country club and she was, um, filling people's coffee. And one day she spilled by accident coffee. And this guy stood up, said racist comments to her, said, yelling at her in front of everyone. And she couldn't say anything back. And she just sat there crying. And, she needed the job. She needed a health insurance. And I remember her coming home and telling me this and her crying. And she said, you know, I'm doing this so that you don't have to, right?
Mm.
So that you can get ahead, so that you can have a voice, so that you can speak up. And that always sticks with me. And I know that's a lot of responsibility on a little kid, but I always think when I'm in a room and I feel, self-conscious or imposter syndrome, or, usually it's the only woman, the youngest, all the things,
Mm.
uh, throughout my whole career, I'm like, I'm in this room for a reason. I don't care how I got here, but I'm here. So it's now my duty to speak up and say something, especially when I feel that there are injustices. And those
Mm.
injustices can be in very different forms. And so, for instance, I often take board seats, and I'm able to be in these rooms where these decisions are being made around compensation, around hiring, around early structure in a company, and being able to say, just ask the question, why is this happening? Why is, for instance, the woman co-founder getting significantly less equity than the male co-founders? Was it as simple as she didn't ask for it? Okay, well, let's get her the same because she's doing the same work, right? Or if it's an all male team and I'm in the room, I say, well, okay, did we interview women? Not okay, great. Let's get a whole list of potential candidates. So you can be in these rooms to say something and speak up, and you can build a fund, you can build a company that you're able to have these voices in the room. And so for
Mm.
me, that upbringing, that frustration that our parents experienced, they I always feel like you're right. It is our duty to go into a room and to speak up for people that can't speak up, like our parents or the people in the room that the people that are not in the room, and you can fight for them, and you can um, get them to a position that is equal, that there's more equality if it makes
Mm.
sense, right? If they're doing the same work for the same title, and be able to change the ecosystem, right? And that's what we're ultimately trying to do with making money, of course.
Yeah, of course. Love that. Love that. Yeah, there's. I want to touch on imposter syndrome and all the sort of mental health aspects, maybe towards the latter part. But I can't help myself at this point, just kind of asking you, because I can imagine an aspiring woman VC or founder sitting here, and we're talking about like boards having an influence on board seats. And before we even get to that stage, I know what they're thinking is, how do I even break into VC? As someone who pursued engineering, you joined Goldman Sachs on the asset management side. You then joined Math Ventures, a Chicago-based fund. What was that career track? Like, was it ever for you very strategic, tactical? Like you knew you wanted to launch Chingona at some point, or was it a bit of luck, opportunity, and timing?
So the beginning part of my career, honestly,
Mm.
was just very unstructured. There was no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the school. This is my first job. And a lot of it was because I didn't see anybody like me in those positions, right? Like the fact that I had a job where I could sit down and health insurance, my parents were happy. So that was literally their goal, was just to get
Like
a
your
regular
setup.
paying job, right? Where I didn't have to do hard labor and I just sat down and I got health insurance. And so they obviously wanted me to be happy and to live up to my full potential, but there was none of that. And certainly when I did see people in those positions, they certainly didn't look like me. So it wasn't like I saw that as an example. Um, and I've just worked my butt off my entire life. And I think, and people ask me, well, where did you get that motivation from? And I just didn't see it as any other way. There was no,
I
my
don't have an
parents are going to take
alternative.
care of me. I don't
Yeah,
have an alternative. I started working when I was 13 years old, right?
I am
Because I
creating the
just,
alternative.
ex- right, exactly. Exactly. I mean, there is nothing. So, and I knew that I'm my parents' 401k, so it's not like I had, anything around that. And so I, early on, I just worked my butt off. And I think I really do feel that when you meet people and when you're so motivated and so focused on getting after one thing. And maybe you might not even know what that one thing is, but just work your butt off doing whatever it is that you're doing. People see that. And I do believe that, early on in my career, I just happened to meet the right people at the right time. And they just saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I'm always grateful for them. So, start off with my sister teaching me the math skills. Then it was a teacher noticed that I was really good at math. And so she put me in advanced math. And then from there, my sister said, you're really good at math and science. Why don't you apply for engineering? I was like, sure. Like that legally blonde moment, well, like it's hard,
Yeah.
and and I was just, I guess, naive, or I just didn't know in the beginning. I didn't know how hard it was to get into one of the top engineering programs in the country. So I just liked the football program at Michigan. So I was just like,
It's a good
great,
reason.
I'll go because I like football. And obviously years later they won the championship. But I was like, okay. And then when I was at Michigan, I still had nightmares that I didn't graduate. It was so hard, but I was just like, well, we don't give up. So I just got to keep going. And that was my thing. I didn't know the probabilities. I actually calculated the probability of someone like me with my background, with my demographic, getting to where I got to, because I did this keynote for these younger students, undergraduate students. I was like, wow, the probabilities are extremely low. This immigrant Mexican girl, with basically in the poverty line, getting to this position, they're very low. I just didn't know. When you don't know, you're naive. You just work your butt off, and you don't know that it can't happen, or you don't know how all the challenges that you're going to face. And so when I was at
Mm.
an engineering conference at the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, I just joined because I was like, okay, it's a group of Latinos. We're all kind of similar backgrounds. We're all struggling to get ahead, and we're all engineers. So I joined this group, and then being a part of that, I saw Goldman Sachs at an event, and I was like, what do you guys do? I had no idea. I was just asked the question. I was just curious. And like, we need more engineers at Goldman. And so that's how I got my first job there. And then I got my first internships, and then I got my first, then going to Kellogg and business school, right? It was just all kind of happened. I worked my butt off, but there was people that helped me get there. I think the second part of my career was a lot more intentional. But I will say this, even just more recently launching my own firm, when I sat at Math Venture Partners, when Troy and Mark hired me, my first day on the job, I was just excited to talk to entrepreneurs. I was just excited. I was like, this is the best freaking job ever. No way did I think I was going to launch my own firm. At the time, I was like, I'm just happy to be here. I don't know anybody rich. I don't know anything about running a firm yet. So I'm just excited to be here. And over time, you learn. And I really feel like there's this internal feeling that this has to work. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know I'm going to get there. I don't know the exact steps, but I know this needs to exist. I know I need to be here. And I've always kind of led with that way and worked my butt off to get there and had people around me inspire me. And I just worked. I always say, I'm not the smartest. I'm not the fastest, but I can outwork anybody. Working nights and weekends. And when I'm just focused on something, I am just obsessed with it. And I really feel that the universe sees that, and there's people around you that will guide you and help you get there. And so I'm grateful for those people throughout my life. But yeah, I would be lying if I said I planned this whole thing out, because I certainly didn't.
One for one. Yeah. I mean, having recently, I was telling you, gone through the executive MBA at Kellogg and Schulich, it's the dual program. Curious for you, was the MBA sort of a nice catalyst to pivot from banking to venture? I know a lot of people use it for pivots in their careers, but especially I feel like for folks, to your point, as we're talking about, we move to a new country, we don't have the same level of access, we don't have legacy money and family offices, and the MBA can serve as as our anchor. Was that
Right.
it for you?
So, I realized part of your question I didn't really answer around like getting into venture, right? And how to think through that. Look, I always say certainly an MBA is one way, but it's not the only way. And
Right.
it's an expensive way to get there. Uh,
Yes.
I will say that. So I didn't know I was going to get into venture. When I was at Goldman, Goldman had paid for a lot of MBAs at the time. I don't think they do anymore, but a lot of my friends were applying for these programs, and I had been at Goldman for a while, given, most people at that time at my age had gone to multiple jobs, and I'm a very loyal person. I just like to, I stayed with the company, and I was in different groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, well, maybe I'll try this MBA thing, because it'll help me kind of figure out what I want to do next. And I had a lot of mentors there that said, you can always come back. Go go to business school, figure out what you want to do, and then if you want to come back, come back. And so I went there, and I do feel like that opened up my world of opportunities. And I always tell this to our MBA interns, because we have one every year since for the last, almost 10 years. I always say, you go there and you're in this bubble, because everyone's competing with each other, and they get their consulting jobs, they get their whatever banking jobs, whatever it is, and they have their internships ready, and then they have the offers ready, and all that. But you really go in there, if you're not sponsored by your firm, or you know exactly what you want to do, you're really going there to explore. So spend the time doing that. Right? As a student, you can email people and say, hey, I want to learn more about your job, or what you're doing, and I want to learn about this industry. You have the opportunity to take classes and to have an internship somewhere, or to start a business, or to just explore different things. And so for me, I applied for this thing called VC Lab. It's a class there, and it's grown. Their entrepreneurship program and their VC program, that's grown since I was there. But I remember it was, again, one of these moments that I talked about early on, but maybe naive, maybe whatever. It was a group of 4 of us women that were looking at finance roles, and we were just helping each other out, because it was mostly, there's very few of us that were applying to these very specific roles, and we're helping each other kind of prepare. And one of them said, "Oh, I'm applying for this VC Lab thing." I'm like, "What is it?" And so I just kind of applied. I didn't even know if I'd get in, if it was for me. But that's what helped me get into my first job in early stage investing. And I fell in love with it. absolutely fell in love. Like, whoa, what is this world where you're seeing these brand new businesses that maybe, at the time haven't even launched these crazy ideas and products, and you somehow have to figure out how to invest in them. And so I just fell in love with it. And I was like, I want to get a job in venture. And I remember, especially at the time, the jobs weren't posted. There's very few jobs, especially in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody that I knew from my class was really interviewing for venture. It wasn't like the thing. Now I have literally high school students emailing me asking me for a job in venture capital. But at the time, it wasn't as big as it is now. And so again, this maybe naive moment of I didn't know how hard it was to get into venture. I didn't know that it's a lot of, IB, Stanford, Harvard's, then you start a company or you work for a big tech company early on, right? Like all these things, I didn't know that that's the traditional path. So I just said, I'm excited to do this. And I spent a lot of I graduated without a job, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted to do and network in the community. And there was Nick Rosa from Sandbox Industries. He saw me at 1871, and where you're at right
Mm-hmm.
now. And I was there with my friend, and he gave me my first project in venture capital. So I'm always grateful for him for doing that. And then through the networking, I found David Weinstein and Rumi Morales. They're
Mm-hmm.
amazing human beings. I'd actually named my daughter after Rumi. She's, just a
Wow.
really good friend. And yeah, and so she connected me with Mark, with David Weinstein. David Weinstein connected me with Mark and Troy from Math, and they gave me my first opportunity. And so this was my path, but certainly that's not the path that obviously, everyone should have their own path. I will say that there's no structured path. There is common paths that people go down, which is start a company, they do your own
Mm-hmm.
investing. What I always say about a new job is do the work before you're actually doing it, and really see more for you to see if that's something you're personally excited about. Because there are a lot of people that say they want to get into venture capital, but then they get into those roles and they're not actually doing the investing and the sourcing. They're not excited about it. And what I mean excited about, like they're obsessed with it. They spend their whole waking moments doing it. Like I remember when I was in venture, I got in, and not that anybody told me to, but I was every day I was going to these events. I was meeting founders. I was talking to VCs. I'm like, look, this is how we're looking at deals. How are you looking at it? Because in VC, there's not many structured programs. It's not like, these big banks that have the 3 months, they teach you everything about it. No, no,
Leadership
no.
development.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just throw you in and just like figure it out. And so you really have to be infinitely curious. You have to be kind of really obsessed with trying to find these amazing founders in these businesses and really dive in and learning from colleagues. And so I was grateful um, that I met these, my group of people in the ecosystem. We would one group was FinTech Fun Tech. We would have monthly happy hours, and we would talk about FinTech deals. And then I had my other group that we talked about, how they do due diligence and how they do read financial models, how they do their own financial models. And so I built this ecosystem in Chicago that I'm always grateful for. So it was a lot smaller than it is now, but it was a small group of us that just helped each other out. And so with anybody that wants to get into venture, try doing the work before you actually do it. Try writing. Now there's a lot of opportunity to write small angel checks into companies,
Yeah.
to build a virtual portfolio and see if you're even good at it, and see internally what excites you. Like, do you actually get excited talking to founders? Do you actually get excited about putting your own personal check, and with the real probability that it's going to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
By 70% chance it'll fail. Do you get excited about thinking about themes and researching them, and then proactively going out and talking to people about it? Like that sort of thing, I think, really resonates with me when I'm looking for someone to join our team. And, how proactive are they before they even come here to do the role? Because there's a lot of things you can do before you actually have the title, right? Or the actual job at a firm.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always about excitement and interest. I can teach everything else. And,
The
that's
technicalities of
my,
it. Yeah.
right, right. The cap tables, the term sheets, like we'll teach you that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't teach you excitement. I can't teach you motivation. I can't teach you, true passion and true curiosity to see these companies. And then also just a personality. I think for me, the VC world, as you know, is fulfilled with a lot of people with a lot of ego, and
Mhm.
it's hard to stay humble. And so for me, I always look at, is someone going to join the team and truly be humble? And there's this power position that happens with founders and investors, and people can abuse it. And so, um, can these team members join and stay true to our values? What values do they have that they can bring? Um, and I love bringing the younger generation. Oh my gosh, it's so like, I think I'm young, but then you bring in younger people in their early 20s, and it's just the opportunities, like what they do with technology, what they do with the marketing, how they, my analyst found this like distribution team of like founders that are about to start companies, and she's been proactively emailing them and they're responding. And I'm just like, I love this excitement and passion. And there's so many things that for me, I learn kind of from this new generation. And so I always
Mhm.
think, all right, do the job before you actually do it. What can you bring to the firm that you're joining? Really think about what stage, early stage versus late stage. That's a very different thing. Late stage is more about, kind of mirrors more of an investment banking model where you actually have numbers and traction and all that. Early
Mhm.
stage is more of a team and a dream. And so how do you find those deals and due diligence them? And then, finding what is, understanding what you are uniquely passionate about, what energizes you, and then finding, and what do you value, and then finding a firm that aligns with those values.
Love it. Yeah, thanks for that recap. That's kind of what I wanted. Like, those actionable items that people can take. Because you're right, there isn't your chartered course was at a different time at a different market, but nonetheless, you can still pull the key themes and apply it to you. What I wanted to also get into a little bit is, and I remember reading an article where, you had the benefit of also working for like a legendary Chicago-based fund, Math, with two also legendary figures in the VC community in Chicago, Troy Hanikoff, Mark Ackler, who I'm sure you learn a ton from. They describe you as like I remember reading something like she was like a pit bull, you know, and that that you would never give up until you really figured something out through and through. It's one thing to join an already established fund, and you have kind of two mentors and founding partners. It's another to get to a point where you're like, you know what, I'm ready to do this on my own. I think a lot of people have those aspirations, but then it's like, where do you even get started? I always wonder that with people who actually start a fund.
Mm,
How do
mhm.
you even dip your toes into getting to a serious part in your trajectory to say like, all right, I'm ready to actually open the door here? How the hell does that even happen? You know?
It's interesting. So obviously, what I say is going to be very different from some of the newer funds. And for
Sure.
me, it was never. So the last 2 years, 3 years, there was a lot more capital in the ecosystem. There were people, all sorts of people starting funds. Many that
Right.
didn't have any VC experience, any formal, working in another fund, and some were
Mhm.
operators, some were MBA students that just launched, right? And for me, that was like crazy because I just always thought, at least for me, I was so grateful to your point that I was got this opportunity with Mark and Troy and other team members, Dana and David Semmel and Scott
Mhm.
Wold, um, because not only did they give me my first job, but a lot of it was giving the freedom to do a lot of things that I, was wanted to do. So I was able to go out and practically find deals. I was able to create structure around what we were doing and bring in my industrial engineering background. I was able to join boards, and I was able to negotiate, term sheets on our behalf. I was able to, again, the freedom of a lot of things. So I credit them for this. But I was also early on, so it was an established firm. When I joined, it was Fund One, and they didn't even have a website or a name, or they had a name, they didn't have a website. I remember like who math. I was googling them. I was like, "Is this real?" So
I can't even find you.
they, yeah, and they had done deals already. They just didn't even have a website up yet. And so going in super early and helping build the infrastructure from the ground up, that was really helpful for me because that's what you do with your own firm. And we also had institutional investors. And so it was institutionalized from the beginning. And that's really important for me because it's not just about being a good investor, but a good investor doesn't mean a good fund manager. You're a fund manager. You are taking people's money. They're investing it in the fund. You're a steward of their capital. You're investing based on a thesis, right? It's not just you. And if you like somebody and you invest your own money and you lose it or, make money, that's your own thing. No, this is other people's capital. These are people, might be foundations. This might be individuals that have spent their whole lives building their wealth from the ground up, and they're investing in you to get some sort of return, right? And so that I take seriously, and so for me, I was able to learn a lot of that. And I remember David Selma, the CFO, I love it. But he's a former hedge fund guy. He was very tough on me, um, but I'm fortunate because even going through our audits and our valuations, like I remember if we had to be 4 decimal points, correct. I remember we were 2 decimal points off, and during Christmas one year, and I was like trying to figure out the calculations and all that. And yesterday with my team, we were doing the Q2 valuations, and I was there calculating with everybody, and then we weren't, we were 2 decimal places off. I'm like, no, we got to be right. And they're like, why? Just round it. I'm like, no, and I know this is kind of extreme, but I there's a lot that I've learned that under a safety net of Mark and Troy and David and Scott and Dana, where I could fail, I could mess up. And one thing they always did too was they took it for the team. Like they showed leadership. I remember one time there was a founder that didn't want to talk to me because I was a associate, and I'm like, Mark, this guy doesn't want to talk to us or to me because I'm an associate, I'm not a partner. And what should I say? And he's like, well, if he doesn't want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to him. And he always
Mm.
st- showed those leadership skills that I
Yeah.
now incorporate with my team. And if somebody on my team makes a mistake, that's ultimately my fault, right? And so I will stand up and say it was my oversight. It was me, right? And so there's a lot of leadership things that I learned from them. I was able to start from the ground up and see how the firm is built. And it wasn't perfect, right? We had to adjust. But they also gave me the freedom to do a lot of things that if you work at a big corporate, big firm, there's some very specific roles and you don't go outside of that, and you only focus on this sector, or you only do this, and you can't, be on boards until you get to a certain point and all the things. And so because of that, I do believe I was better prepared than, I thought I was. There wasn't this aha moment of like, I want to start my own firm. It was not that at all. It was, I had seen an opportunity in the market after years and years and years, of deals and seeing them and over again. And I was like, there's something here, this aha moment of this needs to exist. It doesn't currently exist, and certainly not in the Midwest. And again, back to the earlier conversation around, I know this needs to exist. I know this needs to happen. I have no idea how I'm going to get there, but I know it needs to happen. And so I was actually going to create this angel group of like-minded individuals that, have this deal flow. And I was in the ecosystem talking to a bunch of people, and that's where I found my anchor investor. And, grateful that they were looking for something new at the same time that I was looking for this new thesis, and they were my first check-in. And they, were years ahead of its time. Now there's a lot more people doing this, but having an institutional investor anchor your first fund, huge, right? And again, I wasn't new to my thesis, or I wasn't new to venture investing. I was new to my thesis. So when I launched my firm, I was like, oh, I know my legal people. I know my audit. I know my CFO. Oh, I've done this before. I was like, wow, there were so many things that I had learned. There was obviously things that I had to learn, and there was things that I had to unlearn and relearn. But I'm grateful that I had that experience. And again, I'm not saying that you need that to launch your own firm, but for me, that gave me the confidence to say, all right, there's something here that I've learned, and there's a vision, there's the thesis that I have that I believe can really drive alpha, and it's a personal goal that I want to accomplish, and how I want to change the landscape and the ecosystem, and who makes money and who gets funded. And that's why, and I'm grateful that I was able to have partners around me that were supportive.
Yeah, and what I love too about, and thank you for sharing that. For me, what I took away from the last piece is sometimes it's as crazy as it sounds. It's like just put it out in the universe. I know this sounds very cheesy and like too what's the word, like out of space mindset. But
Mhm.
sometimes if you just even put it out in your ecosystem, like, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm serious about this. How do I even get there? You'd kind of be surprised how the stars could align for you, especially if you've done the groundwork. Not, you've never even, you don't even know what venture is, and all of a sudden you decide to do a fund. That's not what we're saying. You've laid the groundwork, and now you're trying to do something to level up, but you have the backing for it. Um, so I think sometimes it's not as daunting as it could be, or maybe as you would feel initially.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know.
and there's a lot of risk you take, but I always say it is a calculated risk. So
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I didn't have two kids and married, and I said, okay, I can do this for this amount of time, and I can pay myself a tiny, tiny bit, and I have some interns that are getting school credit for it, and and I also didn't go to raise $100 million fund for my first fund. Some people that do that, it's great. For me, it was like I was grateful that I did a $6 million fund because I was able to prove out certain things that I wanted to prove out with the first fund. And then for the second fund, I'm like, okay, now I laying the groundwork, the foundation there. I want to build off of that. And that's what I will do for fund three. And so, it wasn't like I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. There was a lot of thought behind that. And if you know me, and, one of my LPs said this, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And any investment I make, any new person that I hire, any thing that I create, it's not just, I think about sometimes too much, but it's not just throw something, out there and see what sticks. It is some of the like figuring it out as we do it, but there's a lot of intentionality behind everything we do, everything I do. And I was just grateful to build that confidence of being able to do my own thing because I had partners that gave me the ability, the opportunity to learn with them, but also the freedom to be able to explore new ideas and new ways of doing things.
Mm. I'm not going to go because I know we only have 10 more minutes. I want to keep this all personal because I feel like for people, wondering about the criteria and stuff, that's all findable online.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm more interested in the behind the scenes and how you get there. So 6 million fund one, 52.9 fund two. What I was kind of joking with myself is like, how would I even tell my grandma, as an example, or even my parents who know nothing about the venture space, that like, hey, I'm running a $52.9 million fund. Do you ever get like, is it still difficult to explain for like family members back home? Do
Oh,
they think it's your money? Like, I
yeah,
wonder what. Yeah.
totally. Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny because my parents have asked me. My son asked me. My son calls it Chingona Adventures. Um,
It's been
so
going weird.
yeah, basically, I say there's somebody that has an idea of creating something that's going to change the world, and I'm fortunate to be able to see them early on in their thinking of that idea and be able to support them with money, with
Mm.
capital. And that's what I do.
Back to the sort of imposter syndrome. I want to get there a little bit. Mental health. You're a mom of two.
Yes.
You have your own social life. You have yourself to look after. You have $52.9 million to look after. You have a portfolio of founders to look after. You have a team at Chingona to look after. I feel like me just saying that, I'm not looking after any of that, and I needed like a deep breath. So I honestly, I always wonder, like, how do you deal with, if it comes up, the anxiety, the stress, and how do you just level set while all of this is on your shoulders?
Yeah, and I'm glad, and I love, by the way, this podcast that it's a lot of personal. You're not asking very specific on portfolio construction and specific deals
There's enough out there
because
on
there's
that.
enough out there. Yeah, and I don't, and that's what I like to talk about when I meet with people. And how are you doing? What is going on in your world? Everyone has a story. Everyone has something they're dealing with. And we talked about early on around the immigrant experience, and there is a lot of trauma with that as well that I'm just finding out now. And I do think it's important to discuss mental health because it affects all of us in some way. Everyone has their own mental health journey. Um, a lot of the things that I've had to learn was what the things that made me really strong, the things that got me through my childhood were the things that helped me be successful, and now are the things that I need to manage, right? And so this like outwork everybody else, this hustle culture, this thing, a lot of it was because there was no other option, right? And this mentality of you're poor, you're poor, you're poor, or something could be taken away at any moment. That is no longer the case. I mean, and so there are things obviously that could be taken away, but this mindset of you have very limited things growing up, like you don't
Yeah.
have it anymore. And so taking yourself out of your childhood and bringing yourself here and say, no, you don't have that. And you can actually rest. And this rest piece has been something that I've had to struggle with, because as a type A person, as you know, it's just go, go, go. And when you have a child, or when you're on maternity leave, and all you do is you're just focusing on this little human being and feeding them, and you don't get sleep, and you're like, oh my gosh, I spent my whole career go, go, go. And you actually have to rest, and you actually have to just enjoy the
Chill.
moment. Exactly. And that was something that I've had to kind of go through. And this, when I didn't have kids, it was like this, a lot of focus on me, because that's what you do. And
Right.
on Saturdays, I would do cap table Saturdays, I called it. So I would look at a bunch of cap tables, and I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I would model it out and figure out like, okay, what's the best price, and how can we negotiate, and model different scenarios and exit scenarios. But I don't have that time. I don't have that to do all that. I was actually up at 4 a.m. My daughter decided to wake up and be bright and early. And so I've been up, now for almost
Yeah.
6 hours, half of my day. But what I always say, and I've learned this from this amazing mentor, is that you can't, you're not, there's not you're killing it. You're never killing it. You're never just being the best at everything. Some days I'm a great mom and I'm a terrible employee, or a terrible fund manager. Some days I'm a great fund manager and a terrible mom, right? And like, for instance, I'll be closing deals, and I got I'll be commitments, but I haven't seen my kids in a few days. On the other hand, I've been taking care of my kids, and my kids are sick, and I made it to their school musical and whatever else, but there's things that I haven't been able to do. Maybe I haven't been able to meet with people that want to get into venture, and they've been emailing me and all of things. And so you're never going to be perfect. You just have to somehow balance it out. But the biggest thing for me is really making sure I have at least a few moments for myself. So one of the things I always do, minus today, because I woke up at 4 a.m. with a screaming child, but I try to wake up typically around 4:30 in the morning. My child usually wakes up at 5:30, and I take 5 minutes just to meditate. Minimum
Nice.
meditate. If I can get a few little exercises in, I will do that. But I have to get my mindset for the day. And that really helps me. And so I find little things that I can do. I know that meditation, I know that, working out in the morning puts me in my best self. I know that getting some more than 5 to 6 hours of sleep helps me. I don't always get there, but making time for that. I know that I need to fill my bucket with my family. And so we mentioned this before, we did the podcast, or started recording it, but if I'm home, I travel a lot. So if I'm home in Chicago, I try to make sure that I'm there for drop off for my kids, pick up for my kids. I'm there for dinner, and I'm there to put them to bed. And so anything I do after that or before that, I try to schedule my flights out. I try to schedule my events and things I have to do around that. You can't always get that, but spending as much time as I can with my children. And the last thing to say is just the support system. You really have to, think about your community around you. And sometimes that's a nanny, and sometimes that's a night nurse, and sometimes that's literally just women that support you. So I have this group called VC Mamas in Chicago. So I'm named Sonia
Oh, that's cool.
Nagar, and Alyssa Jaffe. Like we meet,
Nice.
and Smriti from Corazon, we meet, and we'll meet at sometimes 4 p.m. because that's before pickup time. And we talk about deals, and we talk about, leading firms, and we also talk about like what's the best car seat, and our birth story, and I've literally I had I was talking to Smriti. She had an Easter egg hunt. I had Easter bunny ears on my
Right.
head with like Easter eggs in my hand, talking about this deal that we eventually ended up doing together. While my kid was screaming because they needed snack time. But So that's
That's
how,
amazing.
that's the support that we have. And it's just this, there's
Expectation versus reality. Like when it's
exactly, literally like, how did this deal get done? I wish I could put that in my LP update. Well, we're at an Easter egg hunt and, that's how I sourced it. But but really, like, it's just meeting people where they are. And I think about that for founders too. I think about
Mm,
that for, during the pandemic where we started to get a dip in female founders reaching out to us. And we said, why? And then I realized, oh my gosh, parents, all parents, but particularly a lot of, the female founders were taking a lot of responsibility. And so can I do something simple as adjust the time I meet with them to nap time, or if they're nursing, turn off the video and we just chat through, the business. So little things like that, really being intentional about supporting the person and what they're going through.
mm.
So I'm grateful that I have a great support system around me. I'm grateful that I have, mentors that have helped me realize that, hey, you can't be perfect. You just have to manage that. Um, and then finding my own moments for myself and what energizes me, even if it's just 5 minutes of meditation, to be able to set my day up for, on a higher note. And, if it doesn't work, if we have a bad day, kind of, moving through that. And then the one last piece around that is really honing in on the upbringing, the beautiful upbringing that I had and what made me get to where I am, but also be able to manage that and understand that, and a lot of that is also me as a parent. There's a lot that comes out when you have children. A lot of your internal kind of traumas come out and triggers, you realize. And so being able to be a better parent, or be a better parent for my kids,
Mm.
and making sure that I do spend those special moments with them.
Damn. Well, that's a nice way to start a morning. Yeah, I can't thank you enough. Honestly, it is 9:59. This was till 10. Time management is key, especially when you're a parent. I promised you we're going to be on time, so we are now going
Yeah,
over. Even though I can talk to you for like
I
700
know.
hours.
I literally feel like we could talk all day.
Yeah, but I need to be mindful for you. Look, I can't thank you enough. I genuinely mean it when I say, to me and to many I know in Chicago, in the US, around the world, in Mexico, I'm sure, you really do serve as an inspiration. And I feel like you're an inspiration, not just to me, but even to someone like my wife, a community of aspiring founders, women investors. And that's a really beautiful thing. Like, you're doing a lot that's visible and invisible. And yeah, you got to give yourself kudos. I know you do, but sometimes it's nice hearing it from someone else. So
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments. And again, I love seeing what you're doing, what you're building, and bringing out these stories of, of people in the ecosystem in Chicago, because people need to hear them. People need to hear, what Victor's doing and all the great things that he's building, and others in your ecosystem. And I love this. This was so much more of just like literally a friend conversation. And it takes you down to the just kind of like the mental piece, the human piece of
yeah,
doing the job that we do, which is also just as beautiful, because that's what we look for in the founders and in the people we interact with. So thank you for that.